So hello, this is Fix It Friday for 24th of June. So today we're just going to take a look at UV optimization-ish and maybe take a look at shininess as well, and that's for studio. So for what do we mean by UV optimization? So let's make something really simple. This came up in group from Leafy, I think it was. I can't remember off the top of my head. So let's just make a quick item that will help us understand the problem. So drop in a cylinder. Just reduce this down to, let's go with 16. We don't want any caps, so that's what we're creating. We're creating a tube, so cap fill type nothing. Let's decrease its depth to 0.5. There we go. And that'll do. So what we're going to do is basically make a very simple belt. So we're not going to do anything with this other than use this for demonstration of some optimization techniques that you can use for UV maps. So let's just shade smooth. So we're going to make this smooth and not faceted. Whoops. Shade smooth. And then let's just check our orientation, viewpoint, front, okay. Edit mode. And face select. Then we're going to duplicate these faces. Whoops. Escape. That resets, and then all we're going to do is just scale them up. So we're going to click drag anywhere inside the white loop, and that will scale on all axes. So we're just going to make a belt buckle. So we're just creating basically a simple belt buckle, a plane. So we've got our belt, alt click, and then we've got our belt buckle. So what we need to do with this now is let's assign some materials. So material properties. So new buckle. Assign. Change the color. This will change the color of the entire mesh because we've only got that one material assigned to the whole thing. So we can invert our selection. So we've got these two faces selected. We can invert that so that we select what's left of the mesh. Select, invert. Then we can create a new material. So as we've got one established already and we are editing a mesh that has that assigned to it, we have to create a new instance. So we click the plus button. That clicks the plus, that creates a new instance, and we can assign that to the rest of the mesh, and it'll go white. So we've got our actual material, the pink one, and then we've got this blank one. So we can now call this belt. Assign, and again we can change the base color just so that we have something to look at. So that's our base materials. So next we want to go into shading workspace. Material properties, make sure that we can see that. And then we can select, so you'll see the color change of base color. So all materials have these two default nodes. So we have principal BSDF and material output. So all we're going to do is add a texture, image texture, drop that into place, and we're going to create a texture, so new. We'll call this belt. Width, we'll do 256 by 256. And then change the generated type from blank to color grid. And then OK. And then finally link those two up, and there we see our texture assigned to that section of the mesh. So we've created an association between this material and this section of the mesh. So we do that for the belt. So what we're going to do is use the same image. So this hasn't got an image, but this does. So select that material, or we can click the mesh and it'll automatically select. And then drop in a texture node. So same thing again. Drop that into place, link that up. It'll go black initially because there's no image associated with it, but what we're going to do this time, we want the same image to the whole, assigned to the whole object or associated with the whole object. So click on the Browse Image to be Linked button. That's this landscape picture type button, and then just select belt from the list, and that assigns it to the rest of the mesh. So that's the basics. We've got our two materials set up, and we've got two essentially UV maps using the same image. So this is where we can start looking at optimization. So we want to go into UV editing. So this is our image. There's our mesh. And this is our object. So we need to remap all of this. So first optimization technique is something like this. This is just a general rule of thumb anyway, but with something like this, we can't map this sphere to an image if it's a single unified object. In other words, there are no breaks in it. And what that'll do, so by default we've got the default UV map that's assigned to the object when we add it to the scene. All objects have a default UV map that will usually get messed up through the editing process, and it'll be essentially like this. So if we didn't do any editing to this and we wanted to, we could use this map and just rescale it like so. But had we edited the mesh, this might be all over the place. So let's assume that we've done some editing and we want to unwrap this. So from the UV menu, so we can either do that in the 3D view or the editor. We want, where is it? Unwrap, unwrap, and it'll do that with something like this, with a belt. So what we want to do, and this is the first optimization technique, is we need to split this in a way that's going to allow it to lay out flat. And we do that by placing a seam in a place that's strategic and hidden, generally speaking, from view. So as we've got this big belt buckle here at the front, that's behind it. So we place a seam behind it so we can split the mesh. So we want to switch to edge, select that edge, and then edge, mark seam. That'll highlight that edge and turn it orange. So if we then select this, so we can use our materials for that. So material properties, select, and we selected the entire belt, and then we can unwrap again, and that flattens out the belt. So that's your first technique. is to hide the seams when you are unwrapping objects. Where you can, hide them behind things, under things. So if it's a clothing item, or if it is a clothing item, actually that's a good example. If it's a clothing item, what you can do is hide the UV seams where you would naturally have a seam in the clothing. So where the sleeves join the rest of the body on a t-shirt, and down the sides of a t-shirt or a shirt where the seams are. Same with trousers, any clothing. So you can either hide your seams where they're not going to be visible, so behind things, or you can hide seams where they might be seen, but you can disguise them by making them seams. So that's technique 1, and this has given us this. So let's edit this a little bit. So I'm going to use the universal widget, so it gives us this thing. So the corners allow us to rescale diagonally, the edges perpendicular. We've got this little node at the top that allows us to rotate, and then we've got the X in the middle that allows us to drag the unit around. So all we're going to do is just reorientate this so it's the right way around. Hold Control to snap, let go, and then we can check that by just keeping an eye on the orientation of the letters. So let's just move that up to the top there, out of the way, and then do the front. So face select, select those two faces, UV, unwrap. So this has given us a much larger UV section. So which way around are we? So we're that way around. So this is optimization technique number 2. So for something like this, your belt buckle is going to be your detail feature. So that's generally speaking going to use a much larger area of the UV map. And this is the thing that will probably most likely have the detail on it. So it could be a big Texan belt buckle with a scene on the front. So what we want to do is just resize this a little bit so that we're on our map. So we've used this much space, which obviously doesn't give us much room for the entirety of the belt buckle, not the belt buckle, the belt. Well, it does if we leave it tiny like that, but the second optimization, select all so we can see both, is if the belt doesn't have any detail on it other than just maybe, let's say, stitching around the edges, and you might be able to poke some holes in here, but let's say it's just the stitching. What you can do with this is just expand it so that it occupies the remainder of the space. And what that'll do is it'll, depending on how big this belt area is, what that'll also do is more or less match up the scale of the textures between the two sections. So you can, what we're essentially doing with the top is tiling the texture so it repeats and so on. But within the same texture, we've also got a unique area. So this is unique to this area of the mesh. It's not being used by anything else. So that's what we can do with our UV maps. And you can do that to varying degrees depending on what it is that you're doing. So if you didn't want, let's say for example, if you did want some holes punched into the belt, so we want holes in this, what we could do, so let's just select all again, we could shrink this down a little bit, like so, so that we're not using quite as much texture space. And then duplicate an area. So mesh, duplicate, escape. And what we can do with this is shift that somewhere else on the UV. Make that fit in the space that we've got. Whoops. And then what we could do is then use an opacity map on this. Well, the opacity map would include the entire image, but what we would do is put an opacity map that would give us some holes in this section. You'd have to play around with it a little bit, but that's something that you can do as an optimization as well. So you're duplicating sections of the mesh and playing around with your transparencies, your opacities, to do certain things to the image within the confines of a limited amount of space that we've got on a UV. So we've got our feature, we've got our tiled area, and then we've got another section that's it's part of the tiled section, but we can do semi-unique things to it with opacity maps, for example. Or if this were, let's say, for example, that were a branding, a label. So you could do one on either side. So let's duplicate that. Escape. Same again. Just shift that down, select the whole thing so we can see the entire map. Let's just match the size as best we can. Oops. And that would be your second area of uniqueness within the limited texture space that we've got. And provided you have your weight paint set up correctly, that'll deform and distort the way that you expect it to, because it's part of the same mesh. So that's a couple of optimization techniques that you can use with your, let's just save this actually. So file, save as. Hey Taurus. Fix Friday 24th June. So yes, it's there are things that you can do within the limited amount of space that we've got, and it's not always necessary that you need to map. So we've got 4 sections of UV. Not UV, yes, 4 sections of UV and 4 sections of the mesh. whoops. And it's not always necessary that we need to have separate images for each section. If we think about the space that we've got and what we're trying to do with our imaging. Sorry, what?
Oh, sorry. No, it's okay.
Oh, no, that's all right. So if we think about our...
I'm trying to turn this off for now because am I able to see it later?
Oh, yes, it's being recorded, so it'll be uploaded for
So
the
now I'm
group.
trying to get out of here because I have to go out.
No, that's all right.
And I can't.
It should be down at the bottom somewhere.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Sorry for interfering.
No, that's absolutely not. That's fine. There we go. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So if you think about your UV maps and the objects that you are creating, you don't necessarily need to create separate images for every part of the mesh. It is possible with a bit of thinking, lateral thinking, that you can fit what you need within the space that you've got. If you think about what the focus is, so as we were saying, the belt buckle is the main thing of focus here, so that uses up the most space. The belt is just a tiled image, so that can be repeated, but we can still make the object reasonably unique by making sections that have their own UVs within the space that we've got left that creates that uniqueness. So this could be a brand, a label, or a name, and different on either side. So we can do things like that with our UVs. So that's the UV optimization aspect of this. So yes, that's UVs. So the next thing to take a look at is shininess. No, it's probably easier to... Let me just save this file. Save as. I'll save it as it currently is. So shininess, we need to look at Studio. So this is probably just going to be a quick one because there isn't necessarily too much to go over with this. Gold bars, let's do that one, that's a good one. Oh no, let's do the phone. And inventory, creator. Create a helper, and then CR2. Right, so if you've been working with Studio and adding shininess to your objects, let's go with back. So that's our back, and this is the shininess. So you might notice, well, you will have noticed, if you've been playing around with shininess, you will have noticed that the shininess changes quite significantly and quite dramatically depending on the room that you're in. Rooms. Hello rooms, where are the rooms? where's the room's gone? Uh-oh. It's not loading in the oh, that's why. Duh. Right. So you might notice that the shininess blows out quite bad depending on the room that you're in. Or it does the opposite, and that's actually kind of what the thing should look like. And it does what you expect it to in other rooms. So let's find one of the other IVU rooms. So these are the default rooms that we have. Oh, I've still got the blue rolls in that one. And the way shininess behaves differs depending on the room that we're in, because of the way that the lighting in the default room, there are two light sources. I think there's one at the top here and there's one on this side somewhere. So the object, if it has a shininess map, gets blown out quite bad. In this room, I think there's just one light and it's somewhere up here in front of the avatar. I think this one's just ambient lit. In this one, which is just ambient lit, the object doesn't really have any shininess to speak of. I mean, there is a little bit. And then, of course, we've got the this is the room with all the shadows and stuff in. And we can see in this room, shininess isn't that bad either. So the upshot of all of this is that shininess, essentially, it's almost irrespective of what you assign here, what you do in your material properties. Shininess is going to blow out if you enter a room that has more than one source of light in it, particularly if it's a small room. I don't know if it matters. Oh, did we just... Oh no, we didn't crash. It doesn't matter so much if it's a large room, because depending on where you're standing relative to the light source, the effect of the light on the object may not be as harsh as it would otherwise be. So we can't control for that. There's nothing we can do about that as creators, because that's obviously to do with the rooms. And so if there are more than one light source, it's likely that your shininess map is going to blow out. If there are no light sources, I don't think I've got any rooms with no light sources. Let's try this one. I mean, that would be handy actually as a feature if we could... Where are we? As a feature, if... Oh, there we are. If we could tell whether a room has light sources or not. CR2. Yeah. Yeah. Right, so yes, this room does have a light source in. So we've got shininess. But it's also heavily ambient lit. Yeah, I don't know if I've got a room with just pure ambient light. Okay, so basically, let's go back to the one with shadows. So we can't compensate for that. We can't adjust for that because those are circumstances that are out of our control. But with that said, what we can do is modify our shininess maps in a way that means that they're not going to be prone to blowing out as aggressively as, so we have a much more even distribution of shininess across all the different types of room, notwithstanding rooms without any lights. And the way that we want to do that, or the way that we can address that, is instead of having shininess maps where we have a lot of contrast, so we go from black to white. I don't know, let me see if I've got something that's like that. I don't think I've got anything like that. Yeah, I don't think I've got anything like that. So basically what we're doing is using grayscale images. So we're reducing the amount of contrast that our images have. Oh, I wonder if... They said... Oh, we can't... Oh, we can only do it with diffuse. Oh, we can only do it with diffuse at the moment. Whoops. Oh, so that feature isn't available yet for shininess. They were talking about that the other day. So what we want to do with our shininess is to mediate them, grayscale them. So instead of having extreme values, so we have black at one end and white at the other for our shininess. So everything that's black is flat lit. It's flat shininess. Well, there's no shininess. It's matte. And anything that's white is hyperglossy, essentially. So what we want to do is essentially reduce that contrast so that we're not using extremes, the extremes at either end. So we're not using black at one end and white at the other. We're making them much grayer and mid-tone so that we're softening the degree of which the shininess will react and behave when it's in a room that's prone to blow it out. Like this one, like the default room, because it's got two light sources in it. Is that the default one? Which was the room that blew it out? I can't remember, but you get the gist. So what we're doing is making our shininess maps more grayscale, and that'll flatten the effect so it doesn't blow out when you go into a room with two or more light sources in it, depending on where they're spaced. So that is the tip for shininess, is to use grayscale images unless you do really need a really shiny surface. So something that was highly polished or highly reflective. I mean, it's not necessary because, I mean, here's a set of gold bars, for example. Whoops. So that's relatively shiny and reflective, but the shininess map for that is this. It's, you know, there isn't as much contrast, so there's very little black and white tonal variation, but it still provides a relatively shiny surface for our object, even though it's pretty much grayscale. So when you are making your shininess maps, what you're making is a surface characteristic. You're not necessarily adding detail to your maps. I mean, you can do, let's, where is it? Did we do one for the V coin, I think? So here we go, V coin spinner, that's very shiny. But if we take a look at the map, so we can see we still do have some quite high contrast for the V. Let's see if we can find this and open it in our image editor. Let's find it whilst that's loading. Where's the image? Ah, here we go. So this area is ignored because it's not part of the texture, not part of the object. So even though we've got this grayscale area, we can drop in something that is white to give us a high contrast, and that works because we don't necessarily need, well, this is spinning, so can't stop that. So let's zoom in a little bit closer. So we can see, as this is spinning, how the shininess is affecting the mesh. That's quite annoying, actually. So hang on, let me find the... Is it that one? No, it's the same one. There was another one. Don't save. Let's open that in Blender. Open, don't save. Where are you, VCoin? Oh, there you are. So in Blender the material's not quite the same as it is in Studio, but so what we've got is our high contrast area of our image, and that gives us a relatively shiny surface with respect to the rest of the image, and it doesn't need to be this area doesn't need to be black in order for this to be super shiny. So when we're making our shininess maps, we don't need to go the full hog and turn this black in contrast to the white. If we do that, this is why the images blow out the way that they do, because the shininess map itself has too much contrast variations. There's too much of an extreme. So let's say this is, so there's too much of an extreme from one side to the other. What we want is something that's more even, but it'll still allow the contrast in the details, and they won't blow out quite as readily as they do in Studio. Not in Studio, in iMVU, in desktop. So that's the tip for shininess, is to make your shininess maps err towards grayscale, not black and white. So you want to reduce the amount of black that you have in your images and the amount of white that's in them. And that's basically the topics for today. So I don't know if there are any questions. But if not, this is recorded for the archive. So that's our UV maps, taking a look at our UV maps and techniques that we can use to optimize. And then shininess maps and reducing those so that they're more grayscale rather than black and white. And keep in mind that your shininess is describing surface characteristics, not detail. So don't convert photographs directly into shininess maps. You'll need to do something else with your shininess maps. You'll have to make them. Because like normal maps, your shininess maps will convert your grayscale, will convert photographs into grayscale, and grayscale won't accurately represent what's being depicted. A classic one is converting a brick wall with sunlight hitting it. Where the shadows are, that'll be no shininess, and where the highlights are, you'll get shininess. So if you imagine the top of the brick will be shiny, and it'll decrease in shininess the further down the brick it goes into the mortar, which will be not shiny. So you want to avoid doing that. Make your shininess maps and make them grayscale. Right, well, if there aren't any questions, we'll call it quits there, and then this will get uploaded and we can get some topics sorted out for next week. Right, yep, call it quits there, and then we shall see you next Fix It Friday, which will be the something of 1st of July. It's the 1st of July. Wow. Right, we shall see you then.